Thank you all very much. This is our Federal Affairs Advocacy Task Force. We're going to ask you to just wait for a 5-minute delayed start now at 12:20 if we can make it work. And forgive me, Supervisor Lee and others, there's some confusion about who's presenting what, and I have to say, unfortunately, the confusion is entirely my fault. So let's just hold off for 5 minutes, and we'll see you again at 12:20. Thank you. All right, let's try that again, and I understand that we are going to manage to ameliorate my lack of clarity by pulling some of the participants in by phone, which will be just fine. So, first item of business is the call to order, and let's call the meeting to order, and that will require a roll call.
Good afternoon, Vice Chairperson Lee.
Aye.
And Chairperson Smidian.
Present.
Thank you.
That takes us to the, and before I go on to public comment, I should say that we have Simone Chen from Congressman Ro Khanna's office joining us today. Ms. Chen, welcome. Thank you for being here with us, and We appreciate your participating in Tom's absence. That takes us to item number 2, which is public comment. Let me check and see if we have any public comment on this item.
We have no requests to speak, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. That'll take us to item number 3, which is the consent calendar. And Supervisor Lee, we have only 2 items on the proposed consent calendar, the approval of the minutes and the meeting schedule for the remainder of the year. Can we get a motion to approve?
Yes, so moved.
All right, thank you. And we had told the Office of the County Council that a minimal report, if any, would be required today. Mr. Press, anything you want to, we have the very detailed grid, which over time, of course, grows because we do more and things take a while in our judicial system. Anything you'd like to share in the way of a specific update or just refer us to the grid for status?
Mr. Chair, I apologize for the interruption. We did not take a vote on the consent calendar.
Forgive me, I'm in such a rush. Let's.
We had the motion from Vice Chairperson Lee, but we didn't have a second.
And I seconded it, and there's no one to speak on this item.
Correct, we had
So
no public
now
comment.
let's take the roll call vote.
Thank you. Vice Chairperson Lee?
Aye.
And Chairperson Simidian?
Aye.
Thank you.
I'm off my game today, I apologize. Now, that takes us to item number 4.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Smitty and Vice Chairperson Lee. Given that we are sort of midway through the Supreme Court calendar from which much of this work is ultimately connected, I'll be happy to defer a more lengthy report to the springtime when the decisions start rolling in.
Could you just refresh at least my memory on what the timeline is?
For Supreme Court,
What are we gonna know, and when are we gonna know it? Let's try it that way.
well, that's hard to predict. All we can say is usually the more interesting / controversial closer vote decisions issue towards the end of the term,
Which term ends in?
end of June.
Okay.
But there have, on occasion, there are what we call DIG, dismissed as improvidently granted. There's all sorts of things that can happen along the way. So I found it best not to try to predict what the Supreme Court will do. Like releasing a draft opinion.
All right. So, in all seriousness, you're indicating things may start to happen in mid to late spring, and then by the time we hit June, it'll be full on in all probability with things that are of higher visibility.
Correct.
All right. Supervisor Lee, anything on this?
None this time, thank you.
All right. And Mr. Press, let me just ask, and again, I know I had asked you not to give a fulsome report today, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there 2 or 3 things that are sort of high visibility or high importance that you would just remind us are likely to make their way through the process by the end of June?
Yeah, I apologize for not remembering the name of the case, but that voting rights case is keeping me up at night.
Okay.
That's
All right.
the main one.
Implications, if any, for our county, given that we are responsible for the elections process here in our county? Too soon to know?
Too soon to say. Yeah,
Okay.
I've heard a number of different commentaries about whether the court will actually take on the issues squarely, whether they will evade them. It's a little bit murky.
All right. And forgive me, I just can't recall, is that, we have talked, I know, as a board about some of the voting rights issues. Is that one where we have weighed in any way, including as amicus? It's not, is it?
I don't believe we have
All right.
on that. I'll check on that one.
All right, if you would give us just an off-agenda, couple sentences, just, there was a period there where there was so much activity that it was frankly hard to keep track of the number and of ways and in which we were obliged to weigh in. All right. Motion to receive the report just as a matter of routine. Supervisor Lee.
Yes, so moved.
Motion by Lee, second by Simidian, and Mr. Clerk, I will call for the roll on this one.
Thank you. Vice Chairperson Lee?
Aye.
And Chairperson Simidian?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that takes us to item number 5, which is a report from the Office of the County Executive relating to the federal health policy and budget landscape, including the Medicare Advantage program and accountable care organizations. And let me ask Ms. Christian, I believe, are you going to present on this?
Good afternoon, Chairperson Simidian. It was my understanding that Bert Margolin of the Margolin Group was going to provide this report. He did provide a written report to your task force specific to the Medicare Advantage program and accountable care organizations.
He did, and I sent him on his way from our Health and Hospital Committee meeting because we have the unusual circumstance of having these two meetings today back to back. Unmindful of the fact that we had a second bite of the apple with him today, if only we would take it. Is Mr. Margolin available to join us by phone?
He is, Mr. Chair, currently in the Zoom. We're asking him to unmute his phone.
Okay.
And while he's doing that, I'll note that he did provide an extensive federal health care policy landscape and budget report to your Health and Hospital Committee just prior to this meeting.
Indeed. All right.
I believe Mr. Margolin is now unmuted.
Yes.
Mr. Margolin, my apologies. As I indicated earlier, I'm afraid I caused some confusion here. So let me just ask now if if you're, I'm not sure where you are, and God help us if you're driving anywhere. I want to be mindful.
No, I'm on a bench at the airport.
All right. My question for you is, are you in a position to sort of walk us through your report, which I believe is about 3.5, 4 pages long, is on Medicare Advantage and Accountable Care Organizations report?
Yes.
Just as I said, don't want to go too deep today. Do want to take the month, which is that part of what I said before is really how I hope to proceed today. But I had forgotten when we ran out of time that we had this other opportunity to pick your brain. So I'm glad we are going to let you start now. Walk us through this, please.
I will. So let me do three things in this abbreviated presentation. I'll define briefly what a Medicare Advantage plan and an accountable care organization are, what these organizations are. Then I want to clarify briefly the similarities and differences, and I'll just touch lightly on some of the controversies that surround Medicare Advantage plans and accountable care organizations. So starting with Medicare Advantage plans, they are basically managed care plans that offer Medicare beneficiaries an expanded range of benefits, typically including things like vision and hearing, in exchange for them agreeing to be in a closed network of managed care providers. Managed care plans have really exploded in popularity over the last decade. Nearly 50% of the Medicare population is in these plans. It was about 27% a decade ago. In Santa Clara County, the report indicates 49% of the Medicare beneficiaries in the county are in Medicare Advantage plans. The concept, so that's the brief definition of Medicare Advantage. Now, what is an ACO, an accountable care organization? The concept was developed in the early 2000s by healthcare economists. And basically, they wanted to create accountable care organizations in the sense that they wanted providers to be accountable for cost and quality. Cost and quality. That's what the principle behind the accountable care organizations involves. When the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, these kinds of payment mechanisms, which is really what an ACO is, were encouraged and expanded to deal with the cost and quality issues. There are many forms of ACOs. There are commercial ACOs. There are Medicare and Medicaid ACOs. Most of the ACOs in the public sector are Medicare, and that's I'm going to focus on here briefly. What they are typically is a group of providers, hospitals and physicians typically, coming together to negotiate a contract. In the case of Medicare, they're negotiating with CMS, and they're going to receive enhanced payments in exchange for improving the quality of care and saving money. ACOs are typically fee for service, and again, one of the main features of an ACO is this sort of shared savings contract. And the way they work is the federal government, in the case of Medicare, works with the providers to estimate the cost of serving the patients in the defined population, becomes the benchmark population. And then what they basically say, what the payer says, is if you can serve that population and at a lower cost than we're estimating would be the case without an ACO, and also meet a series of quality metrics, so that there are savings, we're going to share the savings with you. And at the Medicare level, there are all kinds of metrics. They involve things like the patient experience, how well the doctor communicates with the patient in the area of care coordination, how well chronic conditions like congestive heart disease are managed in the area of preventive health care. Are you giving flu vaccines to your patient population? How well are you doing in that regard? So that's, again, how ACOs basically are structured and operate. Now, brief comparison of Medicare Advantage and ACO would involve the following points. The first point to make is that while they're both payment reforms, the Medicare Advantage plans are typically capitated managed care plans, where again you're being paid on a capitated basis, a per member per month basis, and you're in managed care. And the ACOs, not always, but are typically fee for service. That's one major difference. The other thing is in the Medicare Advantage plans, you have to very intentionally sign up or you're not in. You have to say, I want to be a Medicare Advantage. I want to leave traditional Medicare and jump into Medicare Advantage. And we've all seen these in the television ads that occurred during open enrollment in the fall. There's a massive amount of money spent to encourage people to jump into Medicare Advantage. Contrasting that with ACOs, generally there's no conscious choice by the patient. It's the physician that makes the choice to be in one. Patients are not involved in the process. There's a posting in the office that this physician is in an ACO, but again, the patient doesn't make a conscious choice. Now, in terms of controversies, there are really two levels of criticism of both Medicare Advantage and ACOs. One is sort of practical and specific to the patient experience and to the federal government and state government as a payer. And the other level of criticism is more ideological, and it's a broader policy issue. So on the first issue, which is with Medicare Advantage, those are practical issues. Some people are unhappy with the fact they have a closed network. Even though that's the essence of managed care, some people go into it, they need a specialist who's outside the network, and they're frustrated they can't access the specialist. Medicare Advantage plans are generally sold as less costly to both the federal government and state government and to the beneficiary, and that's often true, but in some cases, after you pay your deductible and co-pays, Medicare Advantage turns out to be, for some people in some regions, not a real dollar savings. And as far as the federal government as a payer, there's a concern about upcoding, where some plans find additional conditions to code for and increase the reimbursement from the payer. And then the New York Times at the end of last year, Mr. Chair, highlighted another issue that I think came to your attention that involves the switching out of Medicare Advantage when you're unhappy with it back to traditional Medicare. The New York Times article made the point essentially that when you this involves Medigap coverage, that extra policy that you take out to cover what Medicare doesn't pay for. When you sign up for Medicare, when you're first eligible in your mid-60s, you're guaranteed a Medigap policy without healthcare underwriting. It doesn't matter how many chronic conditions you have, whether you have cancer, heart disease, you have to be given a low rate when you first sign up. If you pick Medicare Advantage initially, and then 5 years later, 4 years later, you develop a condition where you need a specialist outside of your network, you're not happy with Medicare Advantage, and you want to switch back to traditional Medicare, you can do that, but you then when you go and apply for your Medigap policy, you're going to be potentially medically underwritten. You're going to be charged, you're going to evaluate your health status in most cases, and you'll be charged a lot more money. So that's another controversy that involves Medicare Advantage. Now with ACOs, the key complaint, or a key complaint, appears to be that patients do not know they are in an ACO. The physician's making the choice. And while you can leave at any time because you haven't signed up for it, and there is a posting in the office that's supposed to tell you you're in it, some people become unhappy when they learn that there's a financial relationship between the physician and the hospital that they're being referred to, and that's one complaint. There's also a generalized concern about private equity groups investing in physician groups, buying them out, taking them over, and then getting their physician groups that they now control into an ACO, where, again, you've got a private for-profit private equity group really pushing the physician group to increase profits, and you therefore have this upcoding phenomenon. So those are some of the practical concerns. Now, I'll conclude with a reference to the larger kind of philosophical policy issue that applies to both Medicare Advantage and ACO plans. For both programs, there's a complaint that comes primarily from proponents of the single-payer health reform. These critics argue that Medicare should be a health system without a focus on profits. Medicare Advantage plans are typically private and are, typically often for-profit. And in the ACO structure, the pursuit of provider shared savings or profits is explicit. So critics of these payment structures think that all this moves the federal government away from the goal of a single-payer system, with private insurance playing a minimal role. And there's been congressional protest and objection from, again, single-payer advocates to both Medicare Advantage and to ACOs. So that's a general high-level summary of much of what was in my written report. I'm happy to respond to questions if you have any.
Thank you. Let me just ask, what's the current tenor of the Congress in terms of continuation or revocation of these programs, or amendment to the terms or new conditions? What's Congress kicking about at the moment?
So at the moment, again, in this divided Congress and with the new members and the new committee chairs that change over in the House and change in the Senate in terms of leadership, this has not surfaced as an issue, Medicare Advantage. I mean, to the extent that Senator Bernie Sanders, the chair of the Health Committee in the Senate, wants to still keep the single-payer discussion alive, my guess is that he'll look for opportunities to criticize Medicare Advantage and ACOs. But it's not central to the House Republican agenda, nor at this point to the House Democratic agenda. There was an effort, I'm told, maybe more than one effort, to fix this glitch involving Medicare Advantage and the loss of Medigap guaranteed issue. And those efforts in the past have failed. They've been tried and failed, and they're not currently on the front burner. I spoke to an advocate for a major senior group here in California to see if these Medicare Advantage issues were on their agenda, and they really are not on their agenda at this time. So I don't see the stakeholders being in a focused state on these issues, and in the Congress right now, they're not top tier.
Got it. Thank you. I think what I will do is, for me now, I revert to my earlier indication to you that I want to take some more time to do some more homework and bring this back next month at the Health and Hospital Committee. Okay. Thank you. I'm glad we had this second bite of the apple, or first bite of the apple on a second opportunity here with this committee meeting. Supervisor Lee, comments or questions?
Yeah, Ms. Margolin, with my limited understanding of the Medicare Advantage, one of the problem I think I've read about the system is that since it's very popular, certainly, but then at the same time it has a history of many of the providers, so-called up-service of patients, are billing in more serious conditions than really was warranted, and in order to get a higher reimbursement, and because of that, there's been some study that shows that the cost to the, it's not so much for the cost of the patient, the cost to the treasury, I guess, that ultimately has to pay for this is significantly higher with the Medicare Advantage. You want to share what you've learned or heard about that?
Well, I have heard that. There have been reports done that show that upcoding, that charging for multiple conditions, some of which may not be justified, is a serious problem. There were savings estimated for Medicare Advantage years ago that have not been fully realized because the costs are higher than people expected for exactly the reason that you cited, Supervisor. And again, it's something that that some of the policy thinkers in D.C. are trying to work on. But again, it hasn't risen to the top tier of issues that Democrats or Republicans want to address. But your points are totally valid.
Thank you. And that's all I have on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Margolin, forgive me, I did have a follow-up. I wanted to make sure that I just heard you correctly. It was just a challenge of the microphones and muffled voices. The accountable care organizations you referenced as, in theory, being a vehicle to address cost and quality issues, if I understood it correctly, yes?
That is correct. That is correct.
And did you say they were created back in 2000? Did I get that date right?
They were developed in the early 2000s by healthcare economists, and they began to surface, I think, in the commercial marketplace. And then in terms of Medicare and Medicaid, my understanding is that the Affordable Care Act in 2010 kind of gave CMS instruction to kind of to encourage them and strike additional agreements and make them more plentiful. So it's evolved over the last 20 years, but it's basically over the last 15 or 16 that they've really advanced.
Thank you, and that was where my uncertainty was coming from, which was, I heard a date around 2000, early 2000s, and then I heard Affordable
Yes.
Care Act, which I
Yes.
comes much later. So okay, so they'd been out there as a tool, but really sort of got a boost from folks when the ACA was passed. Is that an accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and again, the proponents of the ACA, a number of really highly respected healthcare economists and experts at the time, believe that the problem that ACOs would address, this is the more positive side of the equation, because there are issues and problems with ACOs, is you have all of these in Medicare, you have all of these siloed systems where physician groups doing their work in isolation, hospitals getting referrals or not getting referrals, people showing up in hospitals without any real coordination with the physician groups. And the theory is that you can get rid of duplicative tests, have better coordination of care, break down the silos, and have better patient quality if the doctors and hospitals are on the same team and have this contractual agreement to work together, and they have to meet these quality metrics, and if they do a good job and they save money, they get extra money. That's the theory, at least, and I'm sure in some cases it works out that way, but in other cases it doesn't.
All right. And last question for today, truly for me, is, if you had $5 in the office pool, any reason to believe that Medicare Advantage and accountable care organizations are going away anytime soon?
No. The issue is not going away. The issue is whether CMS on the administrative level starts to be more aggressive in policing them and making the conditions of organization more rigorous. That can happen at some point, maybe. And but the Medicare Advantage plans they're growing rapidly, and they're not going away. ACOs are not going away either.
Okay. So when you were, my paraphrase, when you were saying the question is whether or not CMS steps up, was that in reference to Medicare Advantage, accountable care organizations, or both?
Both.
Okay.
CMS plays a key role in both areas.
Okay. And notice how I've taken my one last question and turned it into four last questions here. What would stepping up look like again?
Well, it would look like changing the regulations that govern these organizations when they negotiate the contracts, establishing new standards. So ACO REACH, which I referred to in the report, is actually an effort by the Biden administration to do that. I didn't talk about that for reasons of time, but ACO REACH is an effort to create ACOs for underserved areas that don't, on the natural, have a lot of potential for an ACO, where the physician groups and the doctors, or just physician groups in the hospitals, are not on the next we're going to coordinate. But it's designed to create them in a way that reduces the influence of private equity firms and makes them even more accountable, more requirements, more restrictions on what they can and cannot do. So the Biden people are attempting through ACO REACH to make it more rigorous, the program. But congressional Senate Democrats and House Democrats have been unhappy with ACO REACH. Again, this goes to the philosophical question, because there are people in Washington on the Democratic side who don't believe philosophically that we should be privatizing Medicare any further. So even though it's an effort to make them better systems, there are opponents on the Democratic side who don't want to see that happen. They don't want to see them at all.
Got it. And so for those who are focused on having CMS step up, my words, obviously, or provide some complement of fixes, again, my words, it sounds like much of that would focus on empowering consumers, making sure that they understand what they have or have not bargained for, that they've got some limitations that come with their benefits as they perceive them. Am I in the right category, more or less?
That's part of the consumer side. And then on the financial side, cracking down on the upcoding, reducing the influence of private equity so that they can't, like for instance, in ACO REACH, they're requiring that 25% of the board members of an ACO REACH ACO be providers, doctors, other healthcare professionals. They're also providing that Medicare beneficiaries serve on the board, so that you don't have these closed boards that in the past have been dominated too much by finance people who, again, are representing the interests of private equity. So there are also the financial reforms, and then there's the consumer satisfaction concerns you've raised.
Thank you. All right. I have no further comments or questions today. I think Supervisor Lee is good to go. Ms. Chen, anything from the Congressman's office, either in the way of a comment or a question?
No, but thank you for the detailed report. I'll be sure to bring this information back to him.
Thank you. Anything from Dr. Smith or County Council? I don't see anything today. Ms. Christian, are we good to go on this item?
Yes, Chairperson Smith, we are.
Thank you. Then I will ask Supervisor Lee to offer a motion to simply receive the report, which is all we're being asked to do today. Motion from Lee, second by Simidian. Looking to the clerk to confirm there are no speakers on this item.
That is confirmed.
Thank you very much. Then call a roll.
Vice Chairperson Lee?
Aye.
And Chairperson Simidian?
Aye.
Thank you.
And item number 6 is just our catch-all, a verbal report, if any, from the Office of the County Executive on any other items that might be of interest to the task force. Ms. Christian.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Simidian. Prime Policy Group will be providing this report, but I'll set the table just a little bit. The 118th United States Congress convened at the beginning of January of this year. As you know, in the 2022 midterm elections, excuse me, the Republicans won control of the House while Democrats gained 1 seat in the Senate. In the Senate, the Democrats currently have a caucus of 48 and 3 independents. Prime Policy Group is going to talk a little bit about leadership changes and committee assignments, which I know Burt Margolin touched on also at the Health and Hospital Committee meeting. Also talk about the debt limit and some of the issues surrounding that. And then also a bipartisan House Select Committee on strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. That's the exact title of the committee. An update on roads and bridge funding. And then going back to the Select Committee, while not a direct issue to the County of Santa Clara, there could be some implications for the industry in our county, high tech specifically, which would have effect on the people who live in our community and is a major employer here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rich Mead, Aaron Dorton, and Akila Powell. Thank you.
Welcome, Prime.
Thank you, Supervisor Smithian. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Ms. Powell, to start on the new committee assignments for this Congress, and then I'm going to turn to the debt limit, and then we'll jump back to the select committee that Ms. Christian talked about. So, Aquila.
Thanks, Rich. Last month, the House of Representatives made a key move to strengthen oversight of the complex U.S.-China relationship by voting to establish the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Representatives Ro Khanna, Andy Kim, and Progressive Chair Pramila Jayapal voted against the establishment of the Select Committee and declined to endorse any lawmaker for the ranking member role. However, Congressman Ro Khanna was still appointed to that committee. The goal of the committee is to investigate and submit policy recommendations on the status of the Chinese Communist Party's economic, technological, and security progress and its competition within the United States. We don't know what the full committee roster is going to look like because it has not been updated yet. But based on research and some conversations we've had with Hill staff, the Republican side will be Rob Whitman of Virginia, Blaine Luetkemeyer of Missouri, Andy Barr of Kentucky, John Molinaire of Michigan, Darren LaHood of Illinois, Neil Dunn of Florida, Jim Banks of Indiana, Dusty Johnson of South Dakota, Michelle Steele of California, Ashley Hinton of Iowa, and Carlos Jimenez of Florida. On the Dem side, it's Congresswoman Kathy Castor of Florida, Andre Carson of Indiana, Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, Ro Khanna, Andy Kim of Jersey, Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey also, Haley Stevens of Michigan, Jake Okonkwo of Massachusetts, Richie Torres of New York, and Chantel Brown of Ohio. We're going to continue keeping an eye on this committee. We expect there to be a lot coming out of it. The chair and ranking member have a very collegial relationship. And of all the committees that we have seen, this is the one, especially with the balloon incident last week, that we expect to make some significant policy recommendations around competition and a few other things. So with that said, I will turn it back over to Rich.
Thank you. And I'll just add on the China committee, a couple things that the tech companies should be aware of. Number one is while they may not be sort of they may not be in the crosshairs of the select committee, they are certainly going to be called as witnesses for this committee when they get into their hearings. So they should be preparing for that, number one. Number two, this committee is going to look at some issues related to, for example, U.S. investments in Chinese startup companies in the technology space. So again, to the extent some of our tech companies feel as though they have some competition with these startup companies, that review of that and possible recommendations for trying to curb those investments could have an impact on those companies. And as we saw too, as you probably know about, in the Consolidated Appropriations bill, Congress did prohibit the use of TikTok on federal government phones. So you may see some negative legislative efforts aimed at Chinese technology companies, not U.S., but again, that could have a ripple effect upon some of the U.S. companies. Let me turn now to the issue with the debt limit. And again, as you probably know, we have breached our statutory debt limit, meaning our debt has exceeded the threshold that was put into law. And we're getting around that because Treasury uses what we call extraordinary measures to find monies from other sources, from like walled off funds, they are trust funds and things of that nature to keep the federal government, operations going, number one. Number two, we're hearing that revenues are coming in stronger than expected. And between those two items, we don't expect the debt limit to come to a head until this summer, possibly even as late as this fall. One of the economists for one of our clients is projecting an October expiration of the authority to do that. And I should point out too that if the U.S. were to breach our debt limit and wasn't able to borrow anymore, it's not like an end of an appropriation where the whole government shuts down. Rather, it would likely have an impact on some functions of government, so if they may not be able to mail out Social Security checks or do Medicare reimbursements, but the federal government staff is still allowed to come into work, and many of the functions of the federal government would continue even if we are in a position of default. So the president and the Democratic members of Congress are saying that Congress needs to pass a clean debt limit extension, and the Republican members are saying, no, we need to accompany the debt limit with some fiscal austerity measures because of our rising debt load. And the president and Speaker McCarthy met last week on the debt limit and many other issues, but still they met on the debt limit. And so Speaker McCarthy is claiming victory, that he believes that he's brought the president to the bargaining table. And many of our colleagues were on a call with Senator Manchin a couple weeks ago, and Senator Manchin told them that he went and met with the speaker, and he told the speaker, how can I help you manage this debt limit issue? And Senator Manchin also told the speaker, he said, take Social Security and Medicare off the table, because if you don't, you'll get killed on those two issues. And so the speaker has taken those two issues off the table. Right now, the speaker's focused on putting in place discretionary spending limits into law at the fiscal year 2022 levels, which again, the president's not going to agree to that, but it's an opening bid, if you will, by the speaker. The good news is we have seen over the past 30 years a number of times that on a bipartisan basis, discretionary spending levels have been negotiated and put into law. So if you want to be an optimist, there's hope that they can find agreement on that. Having said that, the president may insist, if they're going to put in spending caps, that they also need to address and bring in some additional revenues to Treasury too. And again, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing between now and when this gets resolved. But I'm an optimist in Washington. I think I have to be, living here for so long. But I'm optimistic that eventually they will get a resolution on this issue before we actually breach the debt limit. So with that, let me pause for any questions on that issue before we turn to the transportation issues.
Thanks, Mr. Mead, and thanks again to Ms. Powell, by the way. Supervisor Simidian here with a kind of a connect the dots question, if you will. My recollection of the year may not be precise, but I think it was 2011 when we had a very close call, and there's certainly discussion about the potential for even I'll call it a near miss to have a significant impact on the economy and the stock market. What are you hearing about that, given now the notion that a day of reckoning may not be as early as this summer, but might be as far out as October? And I ask in part because, while much of our funding is federally driven, much of it is also state driven. California, as you know, has a very progressive tax system. If the market tanks, then that has an impact on the state budget, and that has an impact on our budget. So I'm just, as I say, trying to connect the dots. Thoughts about the impact of all of this brinksmanship on the economy?
Yeah, couple thoughts and comments on that. One is, if you'll remember back in 2011, Congress and then President Obama took this right up to the real deadline for default, and as a result, the markets did react, and in fact, our credit got downgraded as a result of that, which also had an impact on the economy and many other fiscal matters. We do anticipate that the market will begin to react as we get closer to this deadline. And, again, being an optimist, my hope is that can help motivate a deal, that as they're watching the stock market decline and have an impact on people's savings and retirement accounts and things of that nature, hopefully that will drive an agreement too. And hopefully we won't take this to the sort of what I call catastrophic level, where lack of action could cause a profound, recession or even depression.
Okay. What's, on that happy note, what's our next topic?
The next topic is Ms. Dorton is going to talk about some of the infrastructure funding. I know there's some interest from the county on that, so I'll turn it over to Ms. Dorton.
Thank you.
Hi, good to see everybody. So I had heard that we did have a little bit of interest on this from, I believe, Supervisor Lee or others. So we wanted to just give you a little bit of an update as to a few opportunities on road and bridge funding opportunities for by virtue of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which, as you know, provides the basis for all the federal highway programs and activities through September 2026, September 30th, 2026. It makes a once-in-a-generation investment of $350 billion in highway programs. This includes the largest dedicated bridge investment since the construction of the interstate highway system. Several funding programs are worth noting. For example, for both FY22 and FY23, the law appropriated almost $9.5 billion for highway infrastructure programs. Of that amount, 5.5 was specifically set aside for bridge replacement, rehabilitation, preservation, protection, and construction program, which is now known as the Bridge Formula Program. Additionally, the Bridge Investment Program, which is subject to appropriation annually, provides $12.2 billion to improve bridge condition, safety, efficiency, and reliability. There's also RAISE grants, which is the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity discretionary grant program. RAISE grants provides grants for surface transportation infrastructure projects, that will have significant local or regional impact. Local and regional project assistance specifically. There's recently been a DOT, Department of Transportation, notice of funding opportunity for $1.5 billion in grant funding through for 2023. The program would help communities around the country carry out projects with significant local or regional impact. Additionally, the Safe Streets and Roads for All, SS4A, as my understanding is what it's known as, grant program, provides $5 billion over 5 years to support regional, local, and tribal initiatives, from redesigned roads to better sidewalks and crosswalks, to prevent transportation-related deaths and serious injuries on the nation's roadways. It's being known as Vision Zero or Toward Zero Deaths initiatives. I think just last week, I understand Secretary Buttigieg announced I think it's $800 million in what is the first round of grant awards for about 510 projects through this Safe Streets and Roads for All program, which is a record amount of funding to improve roads and address traffic fatalities. The next funding opportunity for that program is expected to open in April. The SMART Grants program, which is yet another program, was established to provide grants to eligible public sector agencies to conduct demonstration projects focused on advanced smart community technologies and systems in order to improve transportation efficiency and safety. And then the last one that I flagged is the Reconnecting Communities program, which provides grants for feasibility studies and other planning activities for projects to restore community connectivity by removing, retrofitting, or mitigating highways and other transportation facilities that create barriers to community connectivity, including to mobility, access, or economic development. And my understanding is there should be a notice of funding opportunity for that in late spring 2023. And those are just some of of what I pulled, just sort of as directed. I understood there were some questions about that, but I can also have this drawn up in a more in a memo format and turn it into Ms. Christian.
Thank you. I see that Supervisor Lee has his light on. I will have some questions as well, but let me defer to my colleague first and see what he would like to ask.
Yes, so first of all, thank you so much for the help explaining the various different parts of the infrastructure bill here. So you talked about the $5.5 billion, the bridge, and $1.5 billion the race for the local regional project. There's also you say the Safe for All, the first grant. On the one you specifically talked about retrofit highway, what's that called again?
I'll have to find which one that was. The retrofitting, I think. Is that the SMART grants?
It might be.
No,
I think the one after smart grants.
I'm sorry. This is the Reconnecting Communities program.
Reconnecting communities.
Reconnecting Communities program.
Okay.
And again, I can pull all of this together, including some others that I didn't even mention, that I put it in a sort of a grid format for you so you can see it and see, because it is quite extensive.
Right. So also on the first one, the bridge grant, this is for reliability. So those are for existing bridges. It's not for new bridges, is it?
The first one, I don't know. Well, it says for bridge replacement, rehabilitation, preservation, protection, and construction. So I think there's probably, my guess is that might be up for debate.
Okay.
But I can't speak specifically to that yet, but I can look into that for you.
Yeah, would you please? That'd be great. And the reason this came up basically yesterday, and Dr. Smith, as you recall, we have a bunch of road closures in some of the more remote areas that might not have that many residents living there, but those specific roads are absolutely crucial for the livelihood of getting in and out for flooding or for fire, and we certainly have seen the damages that's been caused in the recent flooding situation. So I just want to make sure that to leave no stones unturned, that our staff is going to work closely to study how much of these potential funding sources might be applicable for us to apply for to help come up with solutions. And if it means building a bridge is something that could be useful to help,
Yes.
Something like that I certainly want to make sure staff is looking at that as well.
Yeah,
Ms. Jordan, one moment. I'm going to turn to Dr. Smith, who has put his light on.
we'll definitely keep connected with Prime and make sure that we're on board with everything that we can get.
Great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I would think that the Reconnecting Communities program sounds like that might fit nicely, but I will absolutely now through that lens, as Supervisor Lee has outlined, that gives me a little more to go on, and I can look a little further and make sure you have all the information.
And may I suggest, we had a very good presentation yesterday with pictures and also a full video that was made to show the damages that's been caused. So I think it would be great if you have a moment to take a look of those damages to see
Absolutely.
that might work. Yeah, thank you so much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Ms. Dorton, nice to see you. First, and Dr. Smith, you may or may not want to chime in here, but Ms. Dorton, while these numbers sound big, for a state the size of California, and given the size of the country, you start to do a little rough division here, and it's not that much money to go around. And particularly when you look at the competition with some urban population centers, I think the thing I would underscore from Supervisor Lee's comments and questions is most of what we talked about yesterday were areas that, as he referenced, were largely low population. I would describe them as relatively rural by the standards of a large urban county like ours. So I'm sure when you're hearing two county supervisors sitting in San Jose talking to you about transportation infrastructure in a county with 2 million people, that sounds kind of, pretty densely populated territory. What we're really talking about is folks who live in our less developed parts of the county that are rural or quasi-rural, with pretty vast distances between one place and another. And the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about is essential to them in terms of their ability to access emergency services or conduct commerce. But the pictures that Supervisor Lee referenced are important. Let me just ask Dr. Smith, if we are hoping to access some of this money, and Ms. Dorton, you may want to weigh in as well, is this money we might apply directly to the federal government for and turn to our local congressional delegation to ask for support on, or is this money that comes to us through the state and it really ends up being a state application process, as some programs do? Do we know yet?
My understanding is that, so there, as I indicated, there are multiple, whether it's programs or grant opportunities. Each one has its own unique formula for who can apply and who can't apply. So I think what we'd have to do is sort of look through, we have to, dive into each one and figure out which one has, because some of them say for local governments or tribes and things, so that would make sense for you, whereas other ones have to be an established business, but not all. And I would also add that I did not flag, I know there are several opportunities for more rural needs. So to your point, that I didn't flag those mainly because I was talking to two people sitting in San Jose. So, but I think, yes, I think if we go through each one, I think we can figure out where the opportunities are for counties.
Thank you. And Dr. Smith, presumably our roads and airports people will be in touch with Prime Policy and try and drill down a little bit on what the nature of our needs are in the somewhat unusual, I won't say unique, but certainly unusual circumstances in our county.
Yes, Danielle will make sure that the two connect.
Good. And Ms. Dorton, forgive me on, my effort to take you to school on Santa Clara County land use policies, but we are a little unusual even in Northern California or the Bay Area in that we have a policy in our county, longstanding policy, of guiding growth and development into the 15 incorporated cities and towns in our county, which by definition means these transportation issues are specific to the 15 cities and towns, or they are state projects or whatever. The area where we have responsibility through our roads and airports department is the area we refer to as the unincorporated area. And while it involves vast amounts of territory, relatively speaking, my recollection is that the percentage of our county population that's in the unincorporated area is maybe 5% or less of the county population. So it's an unusual development posture. Dr. Smith, my recollection is Contra Costa is very different, that there is significant development, or at least there was 20 years ago, or am I misremembering Contra Costa?
You're right. Contra Costa and most counties actually develop urban areas within unincorporated areas and keep them, don't annex them. So totally different approach.
So it's as I say, it may not be unique, but it's certainly an unusual circumstance that may require you all to think a little differently about how you and our federal government could be helpful to Santa Clara County. All right.
Great. Well, I've already pulled a few that are on the general list that I was going to send, but I will make sure I look for some more.
All right. And my short piece of advice is ask for Harry, and we'll leave it at that. Okay.
Okay.
Then anything else today from Prime on other topics. I am mindful of time, and I've promised the clerk we'll be out of here in the next 10 or 15 minutes. But what else do we have in the way of a report, if anything, from Prime?
Chairperson Simidian, Prime Policy Groups covered all the topics that they were going to address today.
Good. Well, then they may or may not have known it, but they did a masterful job of meeting our time, original time deadline, which was 1:15. All right. Then, in the absence of any other questions or comments, Supervisor Lee, a simple motion to receive the report.
So moved.
Motion by Lee, second by Simidian. Let me just double check, see if we have anybody here who wishes to speak before I call on the county council.
We do have one speaker in the virtual queue.
All right, let's have that one speaker in the virtual queue.
All right.
And
The
that
next
person-
speaker is Blair Beekman. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
All right, thank you. Blair Beekman here. Just to note, I had my hand raised on the previous item also. Thanks for noticing public comment time, and thank you for allowing public comment. Boy, as a person of the public, I hope you can have patience at this time and me trying to work through what I need to say. Very much of a thank you that Supervisor Lee yesterday at the Board of Supervisors meeting very nicely talked about and asked questions about what is our status in earthquake preparation. And it was very helpful. I don't know if we're going to have an earthquake in the year of 2023 or not, but I think if we are, we should be preparing for it and talking about it openly. And that's what Supervisor Lee did. If we're not, well then good. Then we should be preparing anyway. And Supervisor Lee took good steps. Thank you. How this relates to what was talked about today with our future of economic issues. California, believe it or not, in the Bay Area, in 2024 and 25, we're really waiting to start working on some really important housing projects and community projects. It's going to be a real important development in the relations of community and government. I'm worried that while we're having these talks about economic issues and recession at the end of this year, does that relate to earthquake things? Does that relate to somehow hurting what California really wants to be building in 24 and 25? I hope we work towards a positive economy and a positive outlook, that our good practices now can really set forth a really important course in 24 and 25. And that makes this talk of anti-socialism at Roy Conner supporting at the national level fairly ridiculous, because we got to sit down to really good caring practices. That takes good principles. And thanks for your time.
That concludes our public speakers.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor, yes?
We
have
do.
a second?
Yes.
It is to receive the report. We're going to go to Mr. Press for county council comment, if any, before the roll call is taken.
Yeah, just a very minor supplement to my earlier report. I just wanted to, the Supreme Court case I was referring to is called Moore versus Harper.
Thank you. That's the voting rights case, yes?
Yep.
Thank you.
And as
All
far
right.
as I can tell, we have not submitted an amicus on that, but we will confirm with an off agenda.
Thank you very much. Ms. Christian, thank you. Our thanks to Prime Policy, if they're still within the sound of our voice, and if not, please convey our thanks. And thanks to Mr. Margolin as well. Supervisor Lee, all good into your all right, then let's call the roll.
Vice Chairperson Lee?
Aye.
And Chairperson Simidian?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have taken care of consent calendar items 7 and 8 earlier today. One of those items was to approve the calendar for the remainder of the year. So you will note that item number 9 indicates that we are adjourning, and that having approved the regular meeting schedule, we will convene once again on April 13th, 2023. Ms. Chen, thanks again for joining us, and give our best to folks at Congressman Khanna's office. Without objection, we are adjourned.